Thank you. Thanks, John. Also, firstly, I wanted to thank you both for having this program. I learned about it at the beginning of college, so I went in with a mindset of trying to find these connections rather than retroactively looking back. So that really helped my entire curriculum during my 4 years here. So here's my presentation, Why Do We Think Desire Design the Way We Do? I'm a business major, and I haven't taken specifically a lot of design courses, but I have taken design-related courses in many different disciplines. So the 3 courses that I took related to design, the first one was Interdisciplinary Studies 100, which was Introduction to Society, Culture, and Technology. And then the second one that I took was Art 23AC, which was New Media and Cybercultures. And then the last course I took was a business course, which was a travel study course to India, where we studied something called open innovation and frugal innovation, which I'll go over eventually. But I'm going to go over 3 sections, which is think, desire, design, and I'm going to try to shed my perspective on why we kind of do the things we do in this field the way I understand it. So the first aspect is the Googleization of everything. This is actually a book written by Shiva Vaidyanathan that we studied in my ISF course, and there were some pretty interesting takeaways I had from this course. The first aspect of how we think the way we do in modern society, instant gratification. So what I found was that as Google's algorithm becomes smarter, results become faster, our desire to get knowledge at our fingertips is also stronger. Or is it vice versa? And so we've learned about a psychology principle called the pleasure principle, where you have this vicious cycle. As things become faster, we want them faster at our fingertips. Information, whether it's in terms of technology or just artifacts in your daily life, you want to feel the benefit of something when you want to feel it. So that brings up this question of delayed gratification versus instant gratification. What are the benefits and what are the cons of each kind of gratification? And I think ultimately that's just a question that we should all ask ourselves. In what situations is it better and healthier to have something when we want it? And in what situations is it okay for us to delay and wait? The second aspect that I also noticed was this need for free-flowing information. And I touched upon it during my point about instant gratification, but really it's the information age right now. So you think of Twitter, Facebook, other social media institutions, or even media and news, how what we want is the ability to learn and share information without censorship. That's really important to our society, especially American society, because that was kind of that's what we were founded upon. That's what our country is about and has grown to be over time. And so we expect that our information flow should be seamless and uninterrupted. When you click tweet, you want your tweet to be the way you wrote it, but in many countries, this is not the case. And so if you look at Google, in countries such as China, Russia, and the Middle East, Google is censored, and the results they show are censored. And those are also places where free speech is censored. So I think in terms of our society, we place a lot of value on information, the ability to whistleblow and whatnot, and I think that plays a role into how we eventually design for consumers, at least in the West. This is something interesting I learned from that book, where according to a study by the UC Berkeley Psych Department, the way Google shows its search results is actually similar to the way that we think. And so if you look at the way Google shows search results, the first one is usually the most popular one, or search rankings have made it the best. But actually that can be manipulated. If you have understanding of search engine optimization, the analytics behind that, you can easily manipulate what's on top and what's at the bottom. So things aren't necessarily the way, they're not purely presented, they're not necessarily pure in that they can be manipulated through technology, through other means, but that doesn't mean things are censored. And then the last aspect of how we tend to think the way we do, or at least I think, is groupthink. And this is a criticism that I've learned about in my business classes and also the design courses, which is that people of similar backgrounds may ignore other alternatives, other ideas, because they have this subconscious or conscious attempt to conform. They want to do what everyone else is doing. And if you think about the network effect, which is people in your network are using something, whether it's an application or a device, so you're going to use it too, I think sometimes that could be considered groupthink. that may not be the best option for your life, but everyone's doing it, and you kind of want to get in on that too. And that's okay, but that's just something that I've noticed. And there's also the Silicon Valley criticism, which I've learned applies to designers, because designers and technologists in the Silicon Valley often create applications that are known to be considered consumer tech. So Uber, a lot of these apps that are coming out these days are for the consumer to use. And oftentimes, the consumer in the mind of designers is a young, technologically savvy person. But if you talk to people in different states, in different regions of America even, like middle America, or people of different demographics, like elderly demographics, low-income regions, they don't know about these apps, they don't have access to these apps, and they can't use them. So groupthink is something that I think is a problem in the Silicon Valley. And these are just some questions that I think are important to ask. Should I outsource my work to someone? This relates to TaskRabbit. Do I want to eat out or cook my own food, regarding Spoon Rocket? And then I mentioned network effect before, the last question. So my friends are using something, so I should check it out too. And I'm not insinuating that the answer to this should be yes or no, but I think it's important for everyone to think about it, the cultural context, what they've been brought up to learn, what their family or their friends have taught them, what their education has taught them, and not just to jump to do something because it's trendy or glamorous at that time. The second aspect is regarding desire. So that was the think portion, this is desire. And desire, I'm going to talk about something called commodity fetishism, and I'm going to invoke Marx, because this is a concept that Marx discussed in some of his writings, and I learned this in one of my anthropology courses as part of the design thread. So according to Marx, we think that all items have intrinsic magical value, and what's presented in front of us when we buy it is just this device, and it's there to please us, and that's just the way it always was. But if you look at the devices we use, I have the example of an iPod here, there's a lot of problematic things behind the devices we use. So, for example, Apple was under criticism because Flexatronics, the company that was manufacturing their products, was engaging in labor, human rights issues and bad labor practices. So I think it's important to acknowledge that things aren't magical and that there's history, politics, struggles, violence behind the things we ultimately consume. And I think that's something that we've been improving on, especially in California, in the Bay Area. There is a lot of prominence regarding fair trade, buying things by knowing how it was consumed or how it was made, what kind of labor went behind it. And I think that is a way of fighting against what Marx thought we would do and what we did do to an extent. And then the example I'm going to discuss is a Fiji water. So Fiji water is this high-end water bottle brand, which I'm sure we've all seen in the stores, consumed, whatnot. And it was really interesting to learn that Fiji water is actually a really important concept back in the Fijian Islands. There's this tribe called the Vatu Kaloko tribe, and during their colonialist struggle, this water was very symbolic. So it is what they would use during rituals, spiritual rituals. It is something that eventually the colonialists tried to seek out because they could make money off of selling this water. And now we actually go to Fiji, an American company, Pepsi actually owns it, goes and seeks out this water to sell and bottle. But the design of the bottle and the design of the label is this beautiful exotic island with this nice flower, and consumers want to buy it because it looks so nice and appealing and fresh. But this design doesn't really reflect the bloodshed and the struggle. And according to anthropologists, it creates this false perception of purity and beauty when the water isn't actually pure. It's not beautiful. There's bloodshed behind it. So that doesn't mean that design necessarily has to account for this sort of story, but a lot of producers have now actually started making it a marketing thing where they'll talk about the story of something in their labels. Whether that's good or bad, I think it's situation specific, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that devices or things we consume in the end aren't magical. There's a lot that goes behind it that we're not aware of. And if design can smartly and pragmatically take that into account, I think that's smart design. And then my last aspect is called exporting America. And this is something Rebecca and John touched upon during their Q&A, which is this concept of exporting West knows what's best mentality. And so I'm going to talk about IDEO quickly. IDEO is a famous design firm, and a lot of the principles in human-centered design are based off of what IDEO has come up with, and they have some really cool products. And the three values that they promote are desirability, viability, and feasibility of projects. And in the middle is innovation. If your product is desirable, viable, and feasible, it's an innovation that people can use. But I'm going to discuss a global context of whether these are applicable, because I was able to take this travel study course where I learned more about design in other countries. And so, firstly, in my art class, we learned about something called the core-periphery model, where America is in the core, and these other countries, usually developing regions, are the periphery. And so there's this mentality in many countries, especially in India and China, of Western design not welcome here, because they believe we're exporting our design and our values to them. And this brings up the concept of humanitarian design versus imperialistic design. And that's where I think a designer has to be really careful and intentional with their user research and really work to understand what the community wants, speak their language, understand their struggles. So a lot of global designers actually go and live in that community for whatever time period to better understand those conditions. That way they can better design the product in terms of the engineering aspect, but also functionality, user experience, user interface. So I think that's really important if we want to look outwards and not just have countries look inwards at us. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about Jugaad innovation, which is what my course was about. Jugaad is a Hindi term for frugal, and in this class, we were able to visit different technology labs in India, and we were really surprised because the ideas that they came up with weren't necessarily high-tech solutions, weren't necessarily from their super smart engineers. A lot of these inventions were actually just from regular people on the streets of India. But they were really, really low cost. Some of them were even high-tech, and they were all environmentally friendly. So I was really surprised to learn about frugal innovation, about Jugaad innovation, and I think that there's prospects for us to go seek out design and to seek out ideas from people in those communities, because they have their own set of experiences that may not be formal education or formal coursework that we're fortunate to have, but they really understand conditions in a way that we might not, but we're trying to. In America, green design is becoming a big deal, and it makes sense because of resource problems. And so the last author here, C.K. Prahlad, he actually talked about how bottom of the pyramid consumers, so people in developing nations, are actually not just consumers, but also producers and innovators. So I think in terms of design, it's great to look outwards. And I'm now open to questions.
Questions for Arushi at this time?
So, because I know Arushi from outside of this course, I know that you're studying business and finance. I was wondering how this, like learning about design in this way, has impacted your current and future career path in business and finance.
Yeah, sure. So I studied business, as you know, and I was always really interested in technology, but business majors often study technology from a marketing perspective, or they go into tech from like advertising or whatnot. So I think eventually I'd like to work closer to the product or the user, just because I think design is really cool, and as a business person, I'd bring in a different perspective. Yeah. What else?
Thank you.
Thank you.